Hello, everybody. I hope you're well. It's been a while since I've been online, but I've been away in Australia for a couple of months, so I thought I'd just wait till I got back and start sharing again. And I'm coming on today to talk about something which I've spoken about before early on in this channel, but I wanted to go a bit deeper in it today because I can see something brewing in the male space of spirituality and self development that has a few potential risks that I wanted to talk about, and that is the theme of semen retention. A lot of men these days are online sharing about their journey of semen retention and how they're doing it, the benefits they're experiencing, and the problems that they're also experiencing as well. And I wanted to come on today to talk about it from the perspective of law. As you know, I talk about law in every video. The reason for that is because we are governed by laws in creation, and if we don't understand how we are working with law, then we are putting ourselves at risk of being corrected by those laws versus working with them in harmony. So nature is governed by principles and laws that are there to keep it in balance and harmony. And many people speak of that in some kind of theme of punishment or wrath that comes from God, but it's not really about that. It's about God and nature doing what it needs to do in order to keep everything in harmony. And if we are out of harmony, then the correction will come, not as a punishment, but just as a necessary balancing force. In biblical times, we would have heard of Noah's Ark and Sodom and Gomorrah and things like that. And you could say in many ways that humanity and Earth has reached this tipping point again, where we're in such polarity that there needs to be correction, and we're seeing nature starting to take the reins of that correction now. And many people might feel that they are at the whim or at the wrath of nature, but as I said, it's not really about that. It's about looking at how we have lost sight of how the laws work and what is the way to get back into that so that we can live more harmoniously in our own way, but also as a collective as well. And I talk about Yeshua, Jesus, a lot for the same reason, because he came to be a walking embodiment of the law. He came to fulfill the law, and his ministry was about showing people what happens when you aren't in alignment, and also the costs that sometimes come by being completely faithful and obedient. So if you understand the biblical story, then John the Baptist came, as many would say, to pave the way for Jesus, to open the way so that when he came, his ministry could be better received. And he did that through repentance baptism. That was a process where people would come and confess their misdemeanors or sins or whatever, and then give it up to God, go into the water, and then emerge from the waters for a second time, just as they did the first time through the womb, this time renewed in spirit, so that they had space then for the Holy Spirit to dwell within. And that's the flame that Yeshua then brought: the law, the structure, the order, the masculine principle. So we've got the feminine principle is the waters, and the masculine is the flame, which comes to essentially impregnate and program those waters. And so, you can imagine that if more people had cleared the clutter in their spiritual lives or their emotional, physical bodies, that they may have been able to receive the word of Yeshua more potently because they prepared themselves appropriately. And so that's just a bit of a sideline, but it is going to take us into what we're talking about today, because I see a lot of men online doing the semen retention and getting benefits, no doubt, and there's also some who are having uncomfortable encounters with people in public. And so I wanted to speak a bit today about the risks that are associated with semen retention if we aren't doing it lawfully. So I'm not here to say that it should or shouldn't be done by anybody. The deeper question is, what spirit is governing the practice? Because some men are doing it through fear, through shame, through the need to control, or the need to be superior to someone or something, or even a sense of mistrust towards the marketplace of humanity, the feminine, for example. And there are obviously also people who are doing it in a devotional, disciplined and reverent way, who are doing it for service, and there's an important difference there. One is going to be lawful and the other is going to invite corruption into the energy that's being stored. So I think that's an important thing to talk about, because retention is not automatically a sacred act. It only becomes sacred when it's consecrated. And consecration is about not just doing something to exalt the self over and above others, and not just doing something to get more power or influence over another person. It's about how you're using that energy to serve creation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the laws that are key to understand with this. The first one is the law of gender. And we all probably have an understanding or have heard about the word. We've heard the word gender used a lot in recent times because of the politics out there on the world stage. But I want to just go a bit deeper with the law of gender and explore it from a more spiritual perspective, because it's not really about men and women, and it's not really about how we identify. It's about the masculine and feminine energies and how they are in union. And the word union is so important, because what the law of gender is telling us is that when the masculine and feminine come together in union, they create a third reality. And in our physical way as humans, it's procreation, man and woman have intercourse, and then through that process a third reality, a third human comes into the mix. And so that human, that baby, the way that they develop, the way that they grow, is going to be influenced by the balance of the masculine and feminine influences in their life. And the important thing to note with this is that both are equally important. Both are equally important, because the masculine represents the direction, the will, the pattern, the seed, the action. And the feminine space is about receptivity, nurturing, nourishment, form, and embodiment. You know, the earth is the feminine, so the earth gives rise to form. The will is born through the primordial waters, through the womb of the mother. So the mother and the father principles are equally important. But I can see, not just in the semen retention world, but in the spiritual world, the self-development world, a lot of people are rejecting the feminine principle in modern times. There is this idea of a matrix that we've got to escape, or the planet that we've got to escape because we feel trapped. We've mistaken divine containment for some wrathful trap, and you know, understandably so. You know, it's not to we don't need to go into all the whys and hows of all that. It's understandable why we've got there, but there has been a forgetting and a misalignment really on how we relate to the feminine. And for a lot of men who are doing semen retention, if they're doing it as a way to avoid the feminine, that's where the risk is going to potentially come from there, because that means that they're holding not in a place of devotion and consecration. It's actually more about rejection and fear or shame, and that's what's going to taint whatever energy is being held there. So in many ways, as we've probably seen with other things, there can be these periods where everything seems to be going well. I'm feeling more energized, I'm feeling great, and I'm experiencing things in my life to show me the effects of this. But what happens over time is that if that power continues to build and it isn't given in service in some way, then it's going to become corrupt automatically. And you could say, if you look to, for example, the religious world, how there's a lot of priests who have, you know, they've come out as sexual deviants or whatever, harming others sexually and things like that. And that's because the energy's been repressed, and anything that's repressed has to find a way out eventually. But if we repress it, if we try and hold it down and not let it flow naturally, then when it finally comes out, as it must do by law, it's going to come out in a very distorted way. So it's not so much about the priests or whatever having these initial dark intentions. It's just a consequence of holding something against the laws of nature. The laws of nature stipulate that everything must be in rhythm, everything must be in flow, and that release is just as sacred as retainment. So the deeper question is always going to come back to, why am I holding this? Is it just for me? Is it just for me to get something, or is it because I'm serving? So the law of gender is about union, not warfare. We know deep down within us all that the masculine and feminine are just as vital and integral for life to flourish. We can't give birth to anything without both those principles coming together. And an important thing to say, just to, I suppose, stick up for the women for a moment, is to say that if you think about it, even Jesus, even Yeshua, even the Son of God, Christ, could not have done what he did if he wasn't first born through the waters of the womb. He had to come through a human female vessel in order to be here to do what he needed to do. So all of us, men and women alike, are not able to be who we are. We don't even have the power to think about creating something or putting something together or manifesting if it wasn't for the feminine that first gave us life. So it's really important to remember that. The next law that's important here is the law of polarity, because that's about where the two are in relation to one another. The law of gender is about how they are acting as one, but then the law of polarity is about how they relate to each other on the opposite ends of the scale. So a question there is, am I in harmony with the feminine? Am I in harmony with it, or am I in opposition to it? And again, there's understandable reasons why people feel opposition, fear, rejection of the feminine, and this isn't to, it's not about making one better than the other. It's just about understanding that we've all got our reasons for why we feel and think the way that we do. But when we allow ourselves to sit in opposition to something, then we're already corrupting the energy field with that, because the truth, the highest law is one. The highest law is that we're all one. So I've got to be looking at all the ways where I reject unity, reject harmony, to protect myself or to uplift or exalt myself over and above others. Because if that's what we're doing, then the seed that we're holding is corrupted by association. So it might feel good in the beginning, but eventually all that flame, all that fire is going to start messing with the mind to the point where a person thinks they're better than others, to a point where the person might become paranoid about what others are thinking, what others are doing, what others want from them. You know, I hear a lot of men on the semen retention journey talking about women as though they are these suspicious, crafty creatures that are trying to control and manipulate them. And while that sometimes is the case, what we have to look at again is the law of correspondence, and how our external world is always reflecting to us the imbalances that we have within. So if I'm out there retaining semen but still finding that I'm having challenging conversations with people in public, or I'm feeling a bit overburdened by other people's energies, there's something in that for me. It's not I'm so powerful because I'm holding my seed and everyone else is just losing their shit. It's these relationships are relationships. There's relation going on. The law of correspondence, the law of polarity. There is a relation to me and that energy. In other words, there is a reflection always about where I'm at. So in lawful polarity, the masculine does not dominate the feminine, nor does it fear the feminine, and the feminine doesn't drain the masculine either. They serve life together. But in a distorted polarity, the man is seeing the feminine as a threat, temptation, depletion, manipulation, all these things. So what a good thing to be thinking about there is, again, why are you holding it? Because if it's fear of the feminine, rejection of the feminine, then that's going to cause a problem. Think of it this way. The law of gender dictates that the two must come together and be in union to create life, to create harmonious life. So if you are holding your seed, fine. But what are you doing with the energy that you're holding? Because again, if it's just about lifting you up, there's a problem there. So you might not want to ejaculate, you might not want to have sex with a woman, but how are you then putting that energy into the earth? Because the earth is the receiving field that receives the masculine energy. So there needs to be some kind of stewardship. So I might not be ejaculating, but I've got to find a way to offer this energy in service to creation, because if I'm not doing that, then I'm breaking that law. And what happens when we do that is nature comes in and corrects, as I've said. So eventually, even though I may have been riding some high, that has to come back down again. And if I'm attached to all this power and glory for myself, then nature's going to eventually break that attachment and bring me crashing back down here. I've got to allow myself to be in rhythm. And let me tell you from experience, you can retain seed without making it such a mission to the point where you're counting your days and comparing yourself to other men. Because if you are working or living your life in a devotional way, a consecrated way, then you'll find that you have less desire around the sexual center anyway, less desire to avoid, less desire to indulge. It's not your primary thought or inspiration. The retention comes as a consequence of you living in a more lawful, harmonious, balanced way, so that when you do feel like you're ready to move something in your body and your body wants to release something, you can do it prayerfully, you can do it reverently, you can do it with God, and in that, when you release, you don't feel depleted, because it's not coming from a place of shame or fear around power. It's coming as an offering. As I said, when you offer your seed to the generative principle of creation, the feminine, then it's taken with reverence. It's taken in a consecrated, sacred way, so that what comes of that isn't depleting, isn't taking, isn't draining. It's actually in a lawful balance. So I'll just move on briefly to talk about what the potential physical issues could come from doing this as well. And the prostate is probably one of the most important ones to talk about for men, because the prostate is, as far as our body's concerned, it's a gate of release and trust that essentially is working with both the law of gender and the law of polarity. So, if I'm not releasing, and I'm not allowing my prostate to do its thing because I don't feel safe, I don't feel held by the feminine, then there is this flavor of distrust that's permeating the seed that I'm holding. The sacral, how I'm relating to somebody. If I can't relate to somebody else, if I'm in adversarial dynamics all the time, and if I don't feel like I can be intimate with another person because I fear how they might abuse or overpower me, then again that fear is essentially fermenting and affecting the seed that I'm holding. And that's where the body starts to give physiological signs of that. If you're clenching, if you're holding, if you're rigid, then the body will take that information and it'll start to get crystallized. And that's where a man can start to see things like prostate issues, So urinary issues, anal issues, things going on in the lower kingdom that are, not feeling right, because the energy that's being held there is not being held in a devotional, reverent way. It's being held in a way of fear. So be very aware of the intention behind why you're holding the seed. I'm not here to tell you not to do it, guys. I'm here to say, be mindful of how the law is working in all this, because everything that we do in terms of a rejection or an attachment is essentially creating a pendulum which is going to swing, and it has to swing back to correct itself in balance. And so we can't stop that swing, but we can choose how far it goes, right? So if I'm in rejection, then I'm pushing myself away from something, and eventually there's going to have to come that. And the bigger the swing, the more uncomfortable it's going to feel. But if I'm walking in balance and harmony and relational balance with the feminine, then I'm not going to see those massive swings either. It's time for us to really recognize that the feminine and masculine are both as sacred and necessary for life to blossom and flourish on this earth, and one cannot be better than the other. And I will just again step on the side of the feminine for a second, because we can see in the world over recent years how the feminine principle has essentially been dampened because it's so powerful. If you look at religious law in the past and the way that women were treated, you can really see that actually it was more about the fear of the feminine power, because women can create and do things that men cannot do. And it's not to say that men can't do what women can do, but you can see how the masculine has felt threatened over a long period of time. And the lawful correction here is not about exalting one above the other. It's about recognizing the union that they share. We're moving into the age of Aquarius, which is about union, not moving into some smushed oneness, but to honor the balance of masculine and feminine energy, because that's the only way that creation can give birth to harmony, is if we embody it in our relational way. So for a man, it's important to be thinking, what am I building? What am I blessing? What am I creating? And what am I serving? Because if it's only me, then the practice is distorted. And that is where you're going to start seeing potential issues in your body, in your physiology, in your psychology, because that energy needs to move. And it's going to move eventually. But is it going to go up and inflate the ego, or is it going to come down and bless the earth? That's a big question. So again, just to summarize, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying think about why you're doing it, and remember the law in everything that you're doing. If you want to reach out to me and just go through this and work through this in your own way, then feel free, get in touch with me, because this is the way I work with people, helping them understand how they are in alignment with law. Because the law is impersonal. It's not about what your preference is. It's about energy. and how energy flows in harmony. So when you look at Lolo in an impersonal way, you can start to work with it. You can start to understand the matrix. You can start to, you know, the matrix isn't something to be escaped from. It's something to be understood so that you can work lawfully with it. Because the matrix field, the mother, the woman, the feminine, is about what contains us, what sustains us, what gives us food and providence, you know. But we've lost trust in that over lifetimes. So it's understandable why we are where we are, but the correction must come through harmonizing, not through rejection, not through self-exaltation. So this is a really important thing for men to be thinking about right now, is why am I doing it? So yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody if you've got any comments or if you want any assistance with this. I've experienced the benefits of not releasing, but I've also experienced the benefits of releasing in a very harmonized, consecrated, prayerful way. So yeah, I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.